Greetings and salutations. Sorry this video took so long. I know that it's been a hot fucking minute since I did the Lost Hero and Southern Neptune, and I know that this is the video that almost everyone is here for, the only reason you're here really, and that's okay, I understand that. I'm sorry this video has taken so long. I had a lot of personal stuff happen, which these videos are just very difficult to make and they're very time consuming. The filming is fun, but the editing takes forever. They're an endeavor, and they take a lot of time, and I went through some personal stuff where the task of making these was just daunting, and then I went through some other personal stuff where I just for a minute there couldn't consume any of my comfort media. Hi Percy. And that included obviously my main comfort media, Percy Jackson. And so it just had to be put on pause for a while, but thank you for being understanding, and we're here now. I'm not in the best headspace. I've been in a bit of a mental health spell, which I thought would be good to return to my comfort world with, but I'm like, oh, this starts with the Percabeth reunion. How am I gonna handle this? Also quickly, everyone knows I hate the covers of the like Australian, and I think they're the European covers as well. I fucking hate them. Look at this. Look how gross this is. Also, it bothers me to no end that it says Percy Jackson and Annabeth will return. Either say Percy Jackson and Annabeth Chase or say Percy and Annabeth. Don't use one's last name and not the other. It just really bothers me. Look how ugly Festus looks. I hate it. I hate it. Also, that's not Percy and Jason. Also, I don't know if this is an Australian thing because we don't get hardbacks, we get just paperbacks. Whereas in America, you have like books first come out in hardback and then they go to paperback. We get like giant paperbacks and then they go to normal size paperback. Now new books are even bigger than this, but this is the size they used to be when they were new. So you can tell this is my first book I got when it was first published, which is kind of, the rest of them are all giant like this. So it's kind of nice. We're using a Leia Organa bookmark set just because I miss Leia Organa. Let's go. Just opening this and seeing Annabeth's name just filled me with such joy, because this is the first time we actually have like an Annabeth POV, and it just made me so excited just to open it and see her name. Lower your weapons, she muttered. We just want to talk. Her charm stick was so powerful that the words flowed over Annabeth, filling her with the desire to drop her dagger and have a nice long chat. Gay. Hold up. Leo stepped forward, wagging his Wii controller. Did you just call my ship a monstrosity? I know you didn't do that. That's everyone on Tumblr in like 2013. Annabeth's seen him and I'm about to cry. I wasn't sure if I'd get that emotional over this. Can you see the tears in my eyes? There are tears in my eyes. Annabeth scanned the faces and, oh God, she saw him. He was walking towards the ship with his arms around two other kids like they were best buddies. A stout boy with a black buzz cut and a girl wearing a Roman cavalry helmet. Percy looked so at ease, so happy. He wore a purple cape just like Jason's, the mark of a praetor. Annabeth's heart did a gymnastics routine. Jesus Christ, okay, cool, let's move forward. Annabeth recognized something else in her face too. In the hard set of her mouth, in a deliberate way, she raised her chin like she was ready to accept any challenge. Raina was forcing a look of courage while holding back a mixture of hopefulness and worry and fear that she couldn't show in public. Annabeth knew that expression. She saw it every time she looked in a mirror. This is why I love getting Annabeth's point of view, because while obviously if you have the ability to analyze characters at all when reading the first series, you can obviously see all of those traits present in Annabeth's behavior and in her few vulnerable moments, but having it, especially considering that this is like a middle grade series, having that explicitly said and getting that point of view from Annabeth so as to humanize her for anyone who still maybe thinks of her as standoffish, or it's nice to have that explicitly stated, especially considering there are probably very young readers who may not have picked up on that, who may not understand Annabeth's character really well, and it's just nice to get a POV from her character so everyone falls as in love with Annabeth as I am. So she's seeing Percy. I hate myself. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna read this. I'm gonna read this to you. I'm gonna read it out loud and not cry. That's what I'm gonna do. I am an actress, I can do this. Then someone else appeared from the crowd, and Annabeth's vision tunneled. Percy smiled at her, that sarcastic, troublemaker smile that had annoyed her for years, but eventually had become endearing. His sea green eyes were as gorgeous as she remembered. His dark hair was swept to one side like he'd just come back from a walk on the beach. He looked even better than he had 6 months ago, more tanned and taller, leaner and more muscular. Annabeth was too stunned to move. She felt that if she got any closer to him, all the molecules in her body might combust. She'd secretly had a crush on him since they were 12 years old. Last summer, she'd fallen for him hard. They'd been a happy couple for 4 months, and then he disappeared. During the separation, something had happened to Annabeth's feelings. They'd grown painfully intense, like she'd been forced to withdraw from a life-saving medication. Now she wasn't sure which was more excruciating, living with that horrible absence or being with him again. The prey to Raina straightened. With apparent reluctance, she turned towards Jason. Jason Grace, my former colleague. She spoke the word colleague like it was a dangerous thing. I welcome you home, and these, your friends. Annabeth didn't mean to, but she surged forward. Percy rushed towards her at the same time. The crowd tensed. Some reached for swords that weren't there. Percy threw his arms around her. They kissed, and for a moment nothing else mattered. The asteroid could have hit the planet and wiped out all life, and Annabeth wouldn't have cared. Percy smelled of ocean air. His lips were salty. Seaweed rain, she thought giddily. Percy pulled away and studied her face. God, I never thought. Annabeth grabbed his wrist and flipped him over her shoulder. He slammed into the paving stones. Romans cried out. Some surged forward, but Raina shouted, "Hold! Stand down!" Annabeth put her knee on Percy's chest. She pushed her forearm against his throat. She didn't care what the Romans thought. A white-hot lump of anger expanded in her chest, a tumor of worry and bitterness that she'd been carrying around since last autumn. "If you ever leave me again," she said, her eyes stinging, "I swear to all the gods." Percy had the nerve to laugh. Suddenly the lump of heated emotions melted inside Annabeth. "Consider me warned," Percy said. "I missed you too." Sometimes I think about the judo flip and I'm like, oh, I don't know, I don't love it as much as some other people do. Just kidding, I do. One, it's not abusive. I've seen a lot of people call that abuse lately, and that's not what abuse is. She is very trained. She knows the exact way to not hurt someone when judo flipping them. I did martial arts for a couple years when I was a kid, and I know how to judo flip someone safely. She's not abusing him. She's not being abusive. Percy's literally laughing. This fits the dynamic. These are people who've grown up sparring, and she's annoyed. It's like having this moment to let all the bitter emotions she felt too kind of get out, but in a playful and safe way, and they laugh it off and they're okay. That's not what abuse is. And I think it's really realistic and very in character to have that moment of that kind of vulnerability from Annabeth too, of we have this vulnerability of how much she needs him, and then she immediately, almost as a defense mechanism, deals with the easier vulnerability, which is the bitter emotions too. As the tornado of food platters settled onto the table, Percy leaned over and whispered, "I want to show you around New Rome, just you and me. The place is incredible." Annabeth should have felt thrilled. Just you and me was exactly what she wanted. Instead, resentment swelled in her throat. How could Percy talk so enthusiastically about this place? What about Camp Half-Blood? Their camp, their home. I think this whole kind of discussion and difference between Percy and Annabeth about Percy feeling very quickly as if Camp Jupiter and New Rome could be a home, whereas Annabeth is so attached to Camp Half-Blood. And I think that a lot of that obviously comes from Percy having lost his memory. So when he arrived, he was just surprised at the possibilities that New Rome offered. But camp has been a home to Annabeth for a lot longer and a lot more permanently than it has to Percy. Obviously, camp definitely over the duration of the first series became a home to Percy, but Percy's home is also anywhere Sally is, and Percy didn't show up until he was 12. Annabeth has been at camp since she was 7, and she was a year-round camper for a lot of that because she didn't have a home, she didn't have a family that she considered her home. She only starts going back in the duration of that first series. So Camp Half-Blood means a lot more to Annabeth than I think it does to Percy. Obviously it still means a monumental amount to Percy, but not quite as much as Annabeth, and I think that's really interesting, and I love just kind of seeing them in a very mature way during kind of from here until the end of Heroes of Olympus talking about what their future looks like in terms of New Rome. Percy recounted his side of the story. He talked about waking up at the Wolf House with no memories except for one name, Annabeth. Once he heard that, Annabeth had to try hard not to cry. I would fully be sobbing. Also would like to talk about how much Annabeth cries. Once again, we haven't talked about it in a while. Annabeth cries all the time, and I love that for her. I relate. No, I would be sobbing. If someone loved me that much that they had their memory swiped, but then like memory of me was so strong that even a god couldn't wipe it, I'd be on the floor. I'd be in like the fetal position. Piper twisted the feather in her hair. That's a conversation for another time, but anyway. Like water leaking through a dam, she suggested. Yeah, Percy smiled. We've got a dam hole. I have no memory of him making a dam joke here, but that just filled me with such joy. Annabeth and Raina just casually being on a hot chocolate day, walking around the city. They're girlfriends. Percy. Percy apparently wants to be in the video. I understand that I say that Piper and Annabeth are girlfriends, and obviously that Percy and Annabeth are soulmates and in love, but Annabeth and Raina are also girlfriends. A vague memory started tugging at her, the way Raina brushed her hair behind her ear, the silver ring she wore with the torch and sword design. We've met before, Annabeth ventured. You were younger, I think. Raina gave her a dry smile. Very good. Percy didn't remember me. I would just like to say that I understand that Annabeth remembering is like a wisdom thing, it's an Athena thing, but I also just think it's an Annabeth being kind and compassionate and taking care and notice of the people around her thing. We clearly, in the beginning of this novel, see how much she can analyze and understand people around her and their emotions and what they're feeling. She's very, very in tune with other people's emotions, and I think that perhaps she just notices that and analyzes everyone in that way, and so it makes people more memorable to her. He and Piper were being pelted with plates and stones. Jason tried to shield Piper, but a brick caught him above the eye. He crumpled and the crowd surged forward. And the best ship that this fandom has ever created was born. She knelt next to Leo. Her grey eyes were as steely as ball bearings. Her blonde hair fell loose around her shoulders, but Leo didn't find that attractive. He had no idea where the stereotype of dumb, giggly blondes came from. Ever since he'd met Annabeth at the Grand Canyon last winter, when she'd marched towards him with that "give me Percy Jackson or I'll kill you" expression, Leo thought of blondes as much too smart and much too dangerous. Thank you, Leo Valdez, for my rights. Also, I would just like to talk about the fact that Annabeth 100% is the leader of the Argo 2 right now. She's the one who knows that she can get through to Leo, and he's talking about being scared of her because she can be scary, but she's not being scary. She's speaking calmly and she looks angry and disappointed because she is, but she's also genuinely trying to understand what happened. She's also making sure Hedge goes away so that Leo can just be honest and not feel threatened by him. I fucking love Annabeth Chase. See, and here we have Percy just immediately kind of like getting angry, and with Percy we know when we're in his point of view, we completely understand that he can sometimes respond poorly, but he's a very kind person and wants to see the best in everyone. But even he, and this comes from him not knowing Leo too 100%, but even he is like angry and he's like, Annabeth told me you did fire it, and then Leo's like, I'm sorry, and Percy just gets angry with him, and Annabeth has to calm Percy down, and you can just really see Annabeth's compassion and her kindness and her care for her friends here. I don't know where the idea the fandom has that Annabeth is like kind of a bitch comes from. Like, yeah, she can be a bitch, but she's not usually a bitch. Does that make sense? I don't know why, but Percy just casually taking Annabeth's hand all the time makes me so happy. It's such a little thing, and it's always him that's initiating it right now. I just think it's the sweetest little thing. As someone who like, I fucking love hand holding, like even like platonically, I'm like with my friends, I'm like, hold my hand all the time, please. I like to feel held. I also think it's really interesting and says a lot about Frank that Frank clearly doesn't like the idea of Hazel running off with Leo, because he can see that Leo looks exactly like Sammy and he understands the implications of that, but Frank's not really like fighting against it that much because Frank is a kind enough person that he wants to have faith in Leo, he wants to have faith in Hazel and trust them. I just think it's really sweet that Frank is still being like, if it's best for the team, then it's all right, and he's still trying to have faith in Leo and get to know Leo, and isn't just an immediate like he doesn't just have immediate anger at Leo like he was, you know, trying to be like, maybe Octavian did something. And I am also going to take a quick break and walk downstairs and buy myself a coffee because it is like midday and I haven't had coffee yet, and I need that. And you know, I'm like not far into this book at all, but like time for a reward, time to reward myself with coffee. Okay, coffee has been drunk. I listened to Sour again. We are ready to keep reading. I know Leo is like, it's, you know, Juno sucks or Hera sucks or whatever, but it's better to have her on our side. I don't know that I agree. Like, I know logically it probably is, but I really fucking hate her, and I think I would feel more comfortable if she was just out of the picture. If she was just like fucked right off, I'd be like, I feel pretty stable right now. I feel pretty okay. Whereas if she was around, I'd be like, what you planning? I don't trust ya. The Wheel of Fortune is a Ponzi scheme. True success requires sacrifice. Sacrifice? Hazel's voice was tight. I languished a loveless marriage in London. I lived a Leary. Stop quoting Hamilton every 3 seconds, Ashlee. God. Hearing Leo talk about how much he always feels like an outsider and really dwelling on what Nemesis said about being the seventh wheel actually makes me hate his ending more. I know a lot of people are like, yeah, he's found his place with Calypso and it's great and that's where he's meant to end up. I really wish that his arc, as someone who feels like an outsider a lot of the time, and for a long time I felt like the answer to that was just, I need to find someone who will accept me. I don't like that his arc just ends with him finding a girlfriend. I actually really hate it, especially considering with the knowledge of Trials of Apollo how unhealthy that relationship turns out to be. I don't think Calypso was very good to Leo whatsoever. I hate that that's where his character ends up, because I think it would have been a much more interesting arc if he, despite what the gods were saying, just found a way to be okay with his place among the seven and with just being a friend to other people and learning to accept himself, and then having the people around him accept him too, without him needing a girlfriend to feel complete. I really would have liked that to be his arc. I think it would have been a really, really good message, especially for kids and especially for the audience of these books, because these books appeal, and like, I don't know, I think kind of books as a whole almost appeal to kids who feel like outsiders. Or all my friends that I had when I was a kid who were big readers were people who felt like they didn't belong, who felt like they were outsiders. And so having a character feel that way and then have his arc ending with just him finding inner peace and feeling okay within himself, rather than just being like, oh yeah, he eventually got a girlfriend and so now he's all right. I really wish that was where he ended up. I think that would have been a better message for the audience that this series has. Look, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really understand the massive hype for the Leo and Echo ship. I think that they're like sweet, it's a sweet idea, but like there's such a massive fan base for it that I don't really understand, but I do still prefer them as a ship to Leo and Calypso. Watch me get to House of Hades and be like, ah, Leo and Calypso are cute, because I enjoy their dynamic in House of Hades. But if I do reading vlogs for Trials of Apollo, you guys will see how much I actually hate them. And cute in a scrawny way. Another said, scrawny? Leo asked. Baby, I invented scrawny. Scrawny is the new sizzling hot, and I got the scrawny. I guess you could say Leo is a scrawny motherfucker with a cool hairstyle. Scrawny. That's actually my taste in men though. Okay, I take it back, the end of this chapter with like Leo being like, you deserve better, Echo, and him seeing that she's actually really pretty when he can actually focus on her features and her kissing him on the cheek. I get it, I get it. You remember who I am? Jason tried to laugh, but it turned into a painful wince. Last I checked, you were my awesome girlfriend Piper, unless something has changed since I was out. Look, I don't ship Piper and Jason. I'm sorry, I don't. It's a bit too rushed for me to really ship them. I love Piper a lot. I just find them as a ship a little bland, but moments like this I'm just like, I love Jason Grace. Jason's such a sweetheart, and I give him a lot of shit because, you know, he's always knocked out and stuff, but I love Jason. He's a good kid. Oh my god, this is my favorite part. This is like my favorite part of this whole book. In an awkward moment, the two boys tried to sit in the same chair at the head of the table. Sparks literally flew from Jason's hand. After a brief silent standoff, like they were both thinking, seriously dude? They ceded the chair to Annabeth and sat at opposite sides of the table. The idea of Percy and Jason both like walking up to the head of the table, doing a little standoff, then Annabeth walking in and them just being like, no, it's yours. Like, it just fills me with such joy. Percy drew a frowny face in his blue whipped cream. I love this kid so much. I love Percy so much. I cannot picturing him just. I love him. That kid makes me so happy. Percy was the first to notice her. He smiled in greeting, which for some reason surprised Piper. He was wearing faded jeans and a fresh orange Gimp half-led t-shirt, as if he'd never been away from the Greek side. The new clothes had probably helped his mood, and of course the fact that he was standing at the rail with his arm around Annabeth. Piper was happy to see Annabeth with a sparkle in her eyes, because Piper had never had a better friend. For months, Annabeth had been tormenting herself, her every waking moment consumed with the search for Percy. Now, despite the dangerous quest they were facing, at least she had a boyfriend back. So, Annabeth plucked the baby girl out of Piper's hand and took a bite, but that didn't bother Piper. Back at camp, they'd had a running joke about stealing each other's breakfasts. There's so much about that I love. Percy being genuinely like friendly and happy and wholesome, and wow, I love this kid with all my heart. Percy being just so happy to have his arm around Annabeth again. Annabeth having a like gleam in her eye back, even though she's literally facing these horrible things. She hasn't even really shared what the Mark of Athena means and what her run-in with Athena had been with like anyone, but she still has this happiness back because she has Percy back after spending so long without him and so long searching for him. They're in each other's presence again, and that makes me so happy. Oh my god, Piper and Annabeth being really close. Annabeth is having a close female friendship in general makes me really happy. Piper having a close female friendship in general makes me happy. The fact that they have inside jokes about stealing each other's breakfast is the cutest thing I've ever heard. Also, they are in love, they are girlfriends. And Annabeth, I could really use your help. You're the only other person who even sort of understands engineering. Annabeth looked apologetically at Percy. He's right, I should stay and help. I'll come back to you. He kissed her in the cheek, promise. Percy, without even, I mean, they might have had the conversation and we just didn't see it, but Percy potentially, without even having the conversation about how much him leaving and going missing affected Annabeth and her abandonment issues, and just knowing that this is a new fear she has now, that he'll just never come back, and just being like, hey, he's figured that out and he's just going to assure her that he's going to come back. I love them. They are so special to me. They were so easy together, it made Piper's heart ache. Jason was great, of course, but sometimes he acted so distant, like last night when he'd been reluctant to talk about that old Roman legend. So often he seemed to be thinking of his old life at Camp Jupiter. Piper wondered if she would ever be able to break through that barrier. This could obviously read to most people and probably was written originally with the intention of Piper just being insecure about Jason's history and that creating a barrier between the two of them. But with what we know from Trials of Apollo about Piper now, and I know that a lot of people interpret Piper's sexuality as different things, and that's completely valid, and I'm not trying to invalidate anyone who believes Piper is pan or bi. I'm not trying to validate that at all. As someone who does headcanon Piper as a lesbian, this does scream compet at me. After hearing so much at Camp Half-Blood about Percy Jackson this and Percy Jackson that, she thought he looked, well, unimpressive, especially next to Jason. Percy was more slender, about an inch shorter, with slightly longer, much darker hair. He wasn't really Piper's type. Again, it kind of screams compet at me, but that's because I'm like, how could anyone who's attracted to men not be attracted to Percy Jackson? I just don't understand that other people have different types to me, I guess. What does Blackjack want? She asked. Donuts, Percy said. Always donuts. I think I kin Blackjack. If we knew each other from that other camp, it's a wonder I haven't already turned you into a dolphin. It was discussed, Percy assured him. I love these books. Okay, look, not to be one of those people who, you know, thinks we have to know who's more powerful, Jason or Percy. They're different characters. We don't necessarily need to, like, dictate who's a better leader, who's the stronger demigod. It's okay. We don't need to pit them against each other. However, it is interesting that in the fight, they are pretty on par with skill levels, and Jason has been training his entire life, and Percy's had a couple of summers to train. It's just interesting to me. Sorry, man, I didn't mean to blast you. Percy's shirt was peppered with burn holes. His hair was even more disheveled than normal. Despite that, he managed a weak laugh. Not the first time. Your big sister got me good once at camp. Yeah, but I could have killed you. Or I could have killed you, Percy said. Jason shrugged. If there'd been an ocean in Kansas, maybe. I don't need an ocean. Boys, Annabeth interrupted. I'm sure you both would have been wonderful at killing each other, but right now you need some rest. I love Annabeth. I also love, like, I don't know, just seeing Jason and Percy being like normal teenagers and, like, you know, showing off a little bit, peacocking a little bit, especially considering Piper and Annabeth are right there. But Annabeth just being like, shut the fuck up, it's great, please rest. I would just like to have a conversation about the fact that Piper's charm speak is still not even that powerful here. Like, obviously it's very, very powerful, but in terms of where she ends up and how powerful she gets with it, she's only just new to the craft here, yet she still can persuade them all to not only leave Leo, Jason and Percy's bodies, but swear on the river Styx not to return. That's my bitch. Also, Frank not catching Leo was really funny to me. I love Leo, but it's amusing to me. Nico having already been there for 3 days and, like, I don't know that there's any Nico plotline that doesn't break my heart. Can this kid catch a fucking break? The image faded and the girl's voice whispered, Percy. At first, Percy thought he was still asleep. When he'd lost his memory, he'd spent weeks dreaming about Annabeth. Come on, come on. He remembered his first day at Camp Half-Blood 5 years ago, when he'd woken from a daze and found Annabeth standing over him. She had said, you drool when you sleep. She was sentimental that way. I am sentimental that way. Besides, seaweed brain, I just thought we could take a walk. We haven't had any time to be together alone. I want to show you something, my favorite place aboard the ship. Percy's pulse was still in overdrive, but it wasn't from fear of getting into trouble. All right. You know why I like it here? It's not just the view. What does this place remind you of? Percy looked around. The cages and stables, the celestial bronze lamp hanging from the beam, the smell of hay, and of course Annabeth sitting close to him, her face ghostly and beautiful in the soft amber light. That zoo truck, Percy decided. That one we took to Las Vegas. I'm actually gonna have a breakdown. I think I'm hysterical. I think I'm hysterical. I don't know if I want to laugh or cry. I have so many emotions. I literally have butterflies right now. I've read this book like 1,000 times. This scene specifically, I could probably recite. Why does it still have this effect on me? I love them so much. We were in bad shape, struggling to get across the country to find that stupid lightning bolt, trapped in a truck with a bunch of mistreated animals. How can you be nostalgic about that? Because seaweed brain. It's the first time we really talked, you and me. I told you about my family, and she took out a camp necklace, strung with her dad's college ring and a colourful clay bead for each year at Camp Half-Blood. Now there was something else in the leather cord, a red coral pendant Percy had given her when they started dating. He'd brought it from his father's palace at the bottom of the sea. And Annabeth continued, it reminds me how long we've known each other. We were 12, Percy, can you believe that? They were too young to experience all the trauma that they were experiencing. They were too young to have the fate of the entire world on their shoulders. No, he admitted. So, you knew you liked me from that moment? She smirked. I hated you at first. You annoyed me. Then I tolerated you for a few years, then okay, fine. She leaned over and kissed him. A good proper kiss without anyone watching. I missed you, Percy. Percy wanted to tell her the same thing, but it seemed too small a comment. While he had been on the Roman side, he kept himself alive almost solely by thinking of Annabeth. I missed you didn't really cover that. But while I was there, I saw so many demigods living without fear, kids going to college, couples getting married and raising families. There's nothing like that at Camp Half-Blood. I kept thinking about you and me, and maybe someday when this war with the giants is over. It was hard to sun the golden light, but he thought Annabeth was blushing. Oh, she said. Percy was afraid he'd said too much. Maybe he'd scared her with his big dreams of the future. She was usually the one with the plans. Percy cursed himself silently. As long as he'd known Annabeth, he still felt like he understood so little about her. Even after they'd been dating several months, their relationship had always felt new and delicate, like a glass sculpture. He was terrified of doing something wrong and breaking it. I'm sorry, he said. I had to think of that to keep going, to give me hope. Forget I mentioned. No, she said, no. Percy. God, that's so sweet. It's just... I may have burned that bridge. Percy is the sweetest person ever. He really just... He is like 16 and he got through everything by imagining a future with his girlfriend. Once again, my expectations for men are astronomical because of this kid. Percy waited, but Annabeth didn't share any more details. He wanted to make her feel better and tell her it would be okay, but he knew he couldn't. He wanted to fix everything for both of them so they could have a happy ending. This fucking kid. But he had a gut feeling that there was nothing he could do to help Annabeth this time other than simply be there. I just love him. Frank averted his eyes as if the sight of them together might burn him. Everyone thinks you've been kidnapped, he said. We've been scouring the ship. When Coach Hedge finds out... Oh God, you've been here all night? Frank! Annabeth's ears were as red as strawberries. We just came down here to talk. We fell asleep accidentally, that's it. Just a couple of times, Percy said. Annabeth glared at him, not helping. We'd better... Frank pointed to the stable doors. We're supposed to meet for breakfast. Would you explain what you didn't do? I mean, I really don't want that fawn. I mean, say that to kill me. Like, obviously this is a middle grade series, but like as an 11-year-old when I was reading this for the first time, I thought that was so scandalous. Leo and Jason being okay with just even discussing not saving Nico, it pisses me off. I understand they have to be cautious and whatever. Neither of them are bad people. I don't think they're bad people for this, but fucking hell. It makes me angry. She's not mortal, Hedge said, sniffing the air. Probably some sort of goat-eating, demigod-destroying fiend from Tartarus. No doubt, Percy agreed. Awesome, Hedge grinned. Let's go. I feel like if I was on a quest with like Percy or like anyone, if I was just on a quest, I would probably be Hedge. I'd be like, she's not human. Someone to fight. Fun, let's go. Because I'd just be excited. I'd be like, I'm living all my like book fantasies. I just want to be a fictional character. I want to live in fictional worlds. I hate reality. Why am I a real person? Hello from me and my Uddy. I've just been streaming and I feel like I'm reading some more before I settle in for the night, so you get Ashlee in a wearable blanket content. Thank you. One of Percy's motivations to like escape being he wanted to get back to Annabeth. I would truly do anything for this boy and he ain't even real. Annabeth's trying to cheer up Hazel and like all she's really knows how to cheer her up with is Percy's seaweed brain moments because Hazel and Percy are close friends, so she knows that that's going to cheer her up, but just finding some way to relate to Hazel. I love Annabeth. I genuinely do not understand where this narrative that Annabeth isn't like a fantastic fucking friend comes from. I don't understand it. Like, canon, Annabeth is a fucking sweetheart. Percy was covered with nicks and scratches like he jumped through a window. He didn't say anything, but he grasped Annabeth's hand weakly as if to say, "Be right with you as soon as the world stops spinning." That is like the most like in character thing to ever happen, honestly. I actually didn't remember Jason and Leo apologizing to Hazel about the Nico thing, which makes me feel a lot better about it. I didn't remember them having an apology, and I always kind of resented them a little bit for it. This makes me feel a lot better. Can you tell that I don't read Heroes of Olympus as much as I read the first series? Although, weird tangent to be like, yeah, demigods make mistakes, like being Confederate soldiers, but also like what we just did. Bit of a weird jumping off point, but I appreciate the apology nonetheless. Annabeth had been riding the subway back from the Upper East Side after visiting Percy's mum. During those long months when Percy was missing, Annabeth made the trip at least once a week, partly to give Sally Jackson and her husband Paul an update on the search, and partly because Annabeth and Sally needed to lift each other's spirits and convince one another that Percy would be fine. That's one of my favourite things ever, is Annabeth making weekly trips to see Sally and Paul. And on the one hand, it is to give updates on the search, but I think in a lot of ways, Sally and Paul, even regardless of Percy, have really become Annabeth's family, and that makes me really happy. The idea of Annabeth and Sally finding comfort in one another, because they're really the only two people who understand how much Percy means to each other and what they're going through with him being missing. Annabeth deserves a family like Sally and Paul. Annabeth saying Percy is everything to me while pleading with her mother to like help her find Percy is one of the most heartbreaking Annabeth moments. I think partially it's probably because I don't really remember this during this interaction, because obviously Annabeth's whole fucking life is tragic and no one deserves a hug more than Annabeth Chase, but that really just broke my heart. Could you show me the trick? I didn't feel comfortable asking anyone else. Frank barely even knows Annabeth, yet he still feels more comfortable asking her how to do the trick. Obviously she's the wisdom's daughter and all of that, but he still feels more comfortable asking her than Hazel or Percy. Percy, he knows for sure, knows how to use Chinese handcuffs. He's coming to Annabeth. He's coming to Annabeth. Can we please stop acting like Annabeth isn't the greatest fucking friend a person could have? Annabeth felt strangely honoured. Frank trusted her not to make fun of him. Besides, she had a soft spot for anyone who was seeking knowledge, even about something as simple as Chinese handcuffs. And that's the thing. You could, like, I don't know, I feel like any other camper at Camp Half-Blood would come to Annabeth with homework issues or anything, and she would be so gentle and nurturing and help them and teach them. I love Annabeth Chase so much. You know, Annabeth said, Leo doesn't intend to be mean. He's just got a big mouth. When people make him nervous, he uses humour as a defence. Annabeth defending Leo while also comforting Frank, while also trying to make sure that the two of them get along, and she knows that, and she's trying to imply that there's no ill will between the two of them. Annabeth knowing Leo well enough, despite not being anywhere near as close with him as, you know, Jason or Piper, she takes the time to get to know everyone on the quest, and she genuinely cares about them, and she's so kind. I'm an Annabeth Chase stern first and a human being second. But Frank, you can trust anyone on the ship, even Leo. We're all a team. We have to trust each other. Annabeth Chase is the true leader of the Seven. She's grown so much. I'm not gonna cry. She's fictional. I've missed her. This is really comforting to me. I definitely needed to take a step back from this series. It was painful for me for a minute there. Just all of my comfort media for some reason was painful for me for a minute there. And I'm glad that I did, because now I can happily return to this. I'm not half enjoying this and half being like, ouch, like I'm genuinely enjoying this. It was tough to go through the past couple months and not have this world and these characters, and now that I'm back here, like having Annabeth and Percy specifically, it's just so nice. Reading this right now just feels like they're giving me a hug and telling me they missed me just as much as I missed them. Like, I know that that's stupid, but this universe and those two characters specifically is so comforting to me, and being able to see myself in Annabeth is just such a... I've been really insecure again lately because, you know, trauma, and with bad mental health spells means that I get very angry at myself, and I tend to start to hate myself. And just being able to read about Annabeth and being like, no, look at how much you love her and look at all the similarities you have with her and look at how much you ken her. It's really comforting. I love these books. Okay, kiddos, another day, time to keep reading. Also, I would like to point out that, like, I feel feel like most of the time when I'm on this channel, I'm just wearing like a sweater and like leggings or sweatpants. I sometimes look kind of cute. Here's an outfit. Rick can literally pry the grey streaks from a cold, dead hand. Annabeth felt a little sad and worried. She felt like she'd lost a symbolic bond with Percy. Why the fuck would Rick take that away? No, I don't accept that. Annabeth kissed him. Good luck, seaweed brain. Just come back to me, okay? I will, he promised. You do the same. I love them communicating that each time, knowing that this is a new fear that Annabeth has, that he's just not going to come back sometime, and Percy needing her to come back as well. I think it's beautiful, and having them now, pretty much every time they separate, anytime they go and do something even slightly dangerous, having that conversation is really mature and really important, and it's not necessarily something I remembered them doing, but I'm really happy they have it as someone with really bad abandonment issues. This is something that I kind of need to hear sometimes, but I'm too scared to ask, and just seeing them be a healthy enough relationship and understand each other well enough that that's just something they know to say to each other just warms my dead, cold heart. Mostly she breathed in the sea air and thought about Percy. God forbid she ever had to break up with him. She'd never be able to visit the sea again without remembering her broken heart. She hopes she never lose him, hope it never ends. She never walks to the sea again. I made it work. Annabeth was instantly jealous. She'd always wished she had dark hair. She felt like nobody took her seriously as a blonde. She had to work twice as hard to get recognition as a strategist, an architect, a senior counselor, anything that had to do with brains. This is what everyone uses as the Annabeth thinks she's a minority because she's blonde thing, and I do think that this is written a little insensitively, but I don't think Annabeth actually believes or has the mentality that she's a minority because she's blonde, or she has to work twice as hard as anyone else, especially considering she's standing there with Hazel and Piper to get recognized in a field. I think she resents that people do underestimate her intelligence because of her blonde hair, because a reminder that this series was written a while ago. This was published 2012, so it probably would have been written like still when a lot of society had the mentality that the mid to late 2000s had, which was very much so looking, we kind of had the stereotype of like blonde bimbos. It was more present than it is now. So reading this now, it feels a little ridiculous. Like, I never necessarily growing up as a blonde felt like people looked down on me because I was a blonde. People occasionally made like dumb blonde jokes, but I never thought like people really underestimated me because of this. But this was written in a time period where that probably was the case, and I think, while yeah, it's worded poorly, I think Rick was trying to get across that Annabeth felt like people underestimated her because of her hair color, and she resented that, and it just came across more insensitive. I don't think that's necessarily Annabeth's way of thinking. I think Rick just worded it poorly. Maybe I'm defending Annabeth because I love her, but that's genuinely how this reads to me. This is also a discussion I have and disagree with a lot of people, where a lot of people, and I'm not trying to invalidate how you read any type of scenario, but a lot of people will disagree that in canon, Luke never had feelings for Annabeth. He never developed feelings for her too. In the Demigod Diaries, we hear Percy explicitly say that he does, and here, first there was Luke Estelle and her first crush, who had only seen her as a little sister, then he turned evil and decided he liked her right before he died. It's canon from both Percy and Annabeth's point of views, and like maybe they're not the most reliable narrators, but they are the most reliable narrators we have in this world, so we kind of have to trust their word. I wish that I didn't interpret Luke asking if Annabeth ever loved him as a romantic thing, but I 100% think it was written with the intention for it to be perceived as a romantic thing, and that's how I read it, unfortunately, which, fuck Luke Castellan, you're a creep. Very slowly, using only 2 fingers, Annabeth drew her dagger. Instead of dropping it, she tossed it as far as she could into the water. Octavia made a squeaking sound. What was that for? I didn't say toss it. That could have been evidence or spoils of war. Annabeth tried for a dumb blonde smile, like, oh, silly me. Nobody who knew her would have been fooled, but Octavian seemed to buy it. He huffed in exasperation. This is something I actually like. It's like Annabeth finding ways to utilize people expecting less from her, or expecting her to not be as intelligent as she is. It kind of reminds me of why I loved Black Widow so much as a kid, as someone who, like, I was objectified a lot as a young age without my consent, and I always really admired that, like, Natasha Romanoff would kind of take how people objectified her and what people expected from her and her own femininity and use it as a weapon, and would use it to her as an advantage. And that's what Annabeth is kind of doing with like the dumb blonde appearance here, and I really like that. I wish that we kind of saw her leaning into using that as a weapon a bit more, because I think it could be a really smart move sometimes. All around the Romans, Charleston Harbor erupted like a Las Vegas fountain putting on a show. When the wall of seawater subsided, the 3 Romans were in the bay, spluttering and frantically trying to stay afloat in their armor. Percy stood in the dock, holding Annabeth's dagger. "You dropped this," he said, totally poker-faced. Annabeth threw her arms around him. "I love you." First time Annabeth ever says "I love you." Can we take note of the fact that she said it first, that it's not masked by insecurity? She just says it in the moment, which fits kind of how Annabeth has treated their entire relationship. She does things without thinking. Percy is much more sentimental. He creates a moment out of these things. Annabeth does it on impulse. Look at their first kiss. Look at pretty much everything they did in the first series. I love that. That's so on character. Also, Percy just nonchalantly being like, "You dropped this." I am in love with that man. But also just him knowing exactly what her signal means. They've been apart for 6 months and they're still so in tune with each other. They're such good partners that he knows exactly what that means and he knows how to help her. I love them. "It's only your imagination," her stepmother said about the spiders. "You're scaring your baby brothers." "Go to sleep now," her stepmother insisted. "No more screaming. Just fucking believe your kid. Believe your kid." The fact that Frederick doesn't believe her as well when he's aware of Athena and the myths surrounding Athena, knows of the mythical world being real, I guess, and he still just doesn't believe her, and he lets his wife tell her that it's all in her head, and no one is listening to the 7-year-old who was falling asleep screaming and crying every night. They're not actually concerned about that. She was 7. It makes me very upset. It makes me very upset. Annabeth deserved a far fucking better childhood than she got. I didn't remember Sammy kind of talking about how he just wanted to be there to help Hazel. He wanted to be there for her during her great danger. I don't remember this. It is making me cry. The diamond came with a curse. I never saw her again. Oh god, I don't. So if we, I mean you, find the statue, what would we do with it? Could we even move it? I just love the fact that Percy has to really retrain his mind to accept that Annabeth has to do something alone. Like, he's just so used to them being a team and he wants to help so bad because he's a fucking sweetheart. Him having to keep correcting himself with just the terminology he uses while accepting, like, I cannot help you with this. I love he. Piper stared at Annabeth with awe, just starting to appreciate the huge responsibility her friend had taken on, and Annabeth meant to do it alone. Friendly reminder that Annabeth literally is the reason that Camp Jupiter and Camp Half-Blood get along. She literally healed the rift between Greeks and Romans. Annabeth Chase did that alone. Annabeth's face turned as white as printer paper. Piper suspected that Annabeth knew what awaited her, or at least that she had a very good idea. She was trying to hold down a wave of panic and terror. My baby. "We'll deal with that when we get to Rome," Piper suggested, putting a little charm speak in her voice to soothe her friend's nerves. "It's going to work out. Annabeth is going to kick some serious booty too. You'll see." "Yeah," Percy said. "I learned a long time ago. Never bet against Annabeth." Annabeth looked at them both gratefully. That makes me so happy. Like, all of that friend group, but especially like Percy, Piper, Grover, and obviously eventually Magnus and Alex a little bit too, but like that's the family Annabeth deserves. And Chiron, that's the family Annabeth deserves. That makes me really happy that they have her back. I just love them. If only she knew more about making relationships work. She was supposed to be an expert, being the head counselor for Aphrodite Cabin. Other campers at Camp Half-Blood came to her for advice all the time. Piper had tried to do her best, but with her own boyfriend, she was clueless. She was constantly second-guessing herself, reading too much into Jason's expressions, his moods, his offhand comments. Why did it have to be so hard? Why couldn't there be a happily ever after, right into the sunset feeling all the time? One thing that could be a little bit of compare, but I actually really relate to that, and I actually like that with Piper and Jason's like entire relationship, almost Rick is writing a more realistic teen romance than he did with Percy and Annabeth. There is that quote in Trials of Apollo that I love, but I won't say for spoilers. Especially being around couples like that, I think it would put a lot of pressure on you and your own relationship, because the reality is, like, these are two teenagers. They've had a very, very rocky start to their relationship. It's going to take a lot of time that they haven't really had at this point to get to that level of comfortability and to understand each other to the point that Piper is craving right now. when you're around couples like Percy and Annabeth to compare yourself to, who know each other that well, like just having doubt in your own relationships is a very realistic thing when being around that. And I actually appreciate that Rick wrote this. Look, I am gonna be honest, Hercules refusing to do anything that Hera is involved in is very valid. She was not nice to him, and you know, Hercules is being pretty chill. He's mourning Piper, doesn't want history repeated itself. That's a bit valid. Also, same, my dude, I would also just be like, oh, you're working with her? I don't really care what your pitch is, I'm gonna pass anyway, because she's a bitch. He probably wasn't used to pretty girls threatening to cut his throat. I fucking wish I was used to pretty girls threatening to cut my throat. Hercules was a bitter, selfish jerk. He'd hurt too many people and he wanted to keep on hurting them. Maybe he'd had some bad breaks, maybe the gods had kicked him around, but that didn't excuse it. A hero couldn't control the gods, but he should be able to control himself. Reminds me of someone from the first series and how I feel about his actions. Hello from my reading chair now. Once again, it's nighttime, but I want to keep reading, so this is where we are. Hi. Percy wasn't sure what that meant, but he wanted to crack the floor and send these stupid gold-shirted twins down to oblivion. He'd never let Gaius spill his blood for any task, and there was no way he'd let anyone hurt Annabeth. Can someone love me that much? Can someone want to protect me that bad? I love when people want to protect me. I know it's bad and I like shouldn't want people to. I really, as like a whole 10-year-old, read the get back, no one touches her scene and was like, wow, this is what love is. They'd all tried to convince Leo that the Scolopendra attack hadn't been entirely his fault, but he wouldn't listen. Percy knew how he felt. Not forgiving himself for mistakes is one of Percy's biggest talents. At least he's aware of it, but oh my god, I just want to hug Percy Jackson and tell him that he is too young to have the weight of the world on his shoulders and that he's done such a good job and that he just is a hero and he's okay. Then it dawned on him. The way he had felt back then for a few days is probably how Annabeth had felt for the 6 months he had been missing with amnesia. That made him feel guilty and a little bit selfish to be standing here arguing with her. She had to go on this quest. The fate of the world might depend on it. Part of him wanted to say forget the world. He didn't want to be without her. You'll mind if I just cry for a bit. But I've heard all about you, Percy Jackson. Oh, yes, a young man who saved Olympus. And his faithful sidekick, Annabeth Chase. I'm nobody's sidekick, Annabeth growled. And Percy, his accent sounds familiar because he sounds like his mother. We killed her in New Jersey. 1, what a power move. Annabeth, I am in love with you. You are everything to me. 2, I used to, fun fact, really want I'm nobody's sidekick tattooed on me. I used to have a list of like Annabeth quotes that I wanted to get tattooed because I've obviously always wanted a Percy Jackson tattoo, and one specifically kind of centered around Annabeth. That just kind of formed into a lot of different ideas over the years, but I'm nobody's sidekick was like the first one that I wanted for a long time. So it changed into wanting to just get her dagger tattooed on me as kind of as a symbol to encourage myself to keep fighting, I guess. It's kind of stupid. There's a whole story behind it that I'm not going to get into, but yeah, that's my journey with Annabeth Chase quotes and tattoos. Behold, Percy shouted, the god's chosen beverage. Tremble before the horror of Diet Coke. Little gags like that are just so quintessentially Percy Jackson, and they just make me happy. Like, obviously they're fun and they're funny and I appreciate them for that, but they also just are comforting because they feel like, you know, that shit would only be said in these books, and it's comforting. It's legitimately comforting to read. Percy wasn't a kid anymore. He didn't want anybody he loved taking a risk for him. He had to be strong enough to be the protector himself. But you don't have to do that. You are still a kid. You're 16 years old, sir. You don't have to be the protector. It's okay to let people protect you, Percy Jackson. That is okay. Please let yourself be protected. The world isn't on your shoulders. Your friends' fates don't rely on you. Not Gaia literally saying, enjoy Tartarus, my little pawn, to Percy. Ma'am. I don't know why I'm genuinely about to cry over. In spite of himself, Percy smiled. How do you do that? You always know what I'm thinking. I know you, she said. And you like me anyway? Percy wanted to ask, but he held it back. It's actually making me cry. That's fine. Percy, she said, you can't carry the weight of this whole quest. It's impossible. She's got a point. She's got a point. This whole scene, this whole interaction, this whole chapter is too much for me. Percy saying, I believe in you. That's not the problem. Like, Annabeth avoiding eye contact with me, like, you have to trust me. You have to believe that I'll come back to you. that's a me move, like I kin her, but her dad was nothing like Gregory Peck. Athena certainly wasn't anything like Audrey Hepburn, but Annabeth knew that people saw what they wanted to see. They didn't need the mist to warp their perceptions. That's hitting a little too hard right now, a little too close to home. That is our most closely guarded secret. Then maybe you shouldn't put a statue of it on your altar, Annabeth thought. That has the same energy as Rumpelstiltskin in like the original fairy tale about Rumpelstiltskin being like, bet you can't guess my name, and then going around the village and singing a song about how his name is Rumpelstiltskin. Just friendly reminder that Annabeth Chase had to make a splint for her broken ankle herself and just still kept going. This girl is exhausted. She's just had a drink, but prior to that was probably a little dehydrated. She's terrified. She now has a broken ankle and she's like, you gotta keep going. Obviously she's a little discouraged by it. She doesn't opt to call out. She just goes, right, I'm gonna listen to what Grover said, I'm gonna evaluate my surroundings, I'm gonna make myself splint, and I'm gonna keep going because I'm not giving up. I love her. Fun fact, when I was like 16, 17, anytime I went through anything difficult, I would be like, you know what, when Annabeth Chase was my age, she fucking followed the mark of Athena, so I can do this, and I still do that sometimes. Annabeth wanted to sob. She wanted someone, anyone, to be here for her. She wanted Leo with his fire skills, or Jason with his lightning, or Hazel to collapse the tunnel. Most of all, she wanted Percy. She always felt braver when Percy was with her. I'm not going to die here, she told herself. I'm going to see Percy again. Yeah, many emotions, many feelings, head full. This isn't a fun book for me and my arachnophobia, I'm not gonna lie. I actually want to just bring up the fact that Arachne kind of took Annabeth's happiest memory and made it into this beautiful tapestry, but now anytime Annabeth thinks of that memory, probably more so than actually thinking about the moment itself, which was one of the happiest moments of her life, she's going to think about the fact that Arachne saw it in her dreams and that Arachne made art out of it, and it's tainted now, and fuck you for that, Arachne. He doubted they would care, but if Annabeth was here, she would have spent the whole day talking about it. Thinking about that made Leo wonder how she was doing on a Mark of Athena expedition. He never thought he'd feel this way, but he was worried about that scary blonde girl. I think Leo and Annabeth might be one of my favorite like underrated friendships. We've got a lot of Leo and Annabeth like interactions and them showing a lot of care for each other in this novel, and it's not something I ever really think about or even necessarily remembered as something very present in this, but I think that might be one of my favorite like underrated little friendships. Frank and Leo bonding and talking to each other with sympathy and kindness and bonding over shared trauma, but Leo also being like very understanding of Frank's fear of fire and, you know, from this point on warning him when he is about to use fire, like to find some light in the tunnel and stuff. I just really appreciate that. I love both of these characters so much, and I think it would have been very easy to just kind of keep them as enemies because of jealousy or whatever, but I think they do a really good job of, even from the get-go, like they're not awful to each other, they just don't. Frank doesn't trust Leo for like a valid reason, and Leo is a bit standoffish because of that, but as soon as they work past that, they understand where the other's coming from and they work towards a friendship, and I think that's a really, really, I don't know, I love them. For the first time in days, Leo felt really hopeful. Naturally, that's when everything went wrong. That's my mental health. That's what my mental health does. I feel like we don't really talk enough about how Annabeth obviously has wisdom as her superpower, I guess, but Leo's biggest strength and his superpower, I think, is his intelligence too, but it's definitely more so than the fire thing. I think Leo's superpower is definitely his intelligence, and I'm of the believer that Annabeth Chase is the strongest demigod of her generation because she is this powerful without having any powers, but I think that Leo is probably up there too, because without even needing his fire abilities, he is so resourceful and so quick-witted, and he's so good in his feet, and he's so good at like coming up with ideas and mechanisms on the spot that I think that is a real superpower, and I think that does make him one of the most powerful demigods too. 16, she asked. He nodded. Oh boy, I can get my driver's license. Do you reckon in Trials of Apollo, Jason would listen to driver's license and think about Piper? Come on, she chided. Being a hero doesn't mean you're invincible. It just means that you're brave enough to stand up and do what's needed. When I say that I learned what being a hero means from Spider-Man in these books, specifically Percy, but these books as a whole, I mean that shit. Please, Percy said, try again. He pleaded with those sea green eyes like a cute baby seal that needed help. Piper wondered how Annabeth ever won an argument with this guy. I never could. I'm an Annabeth Kinney and I would let Percy win every argument. He would just look at me with his eyes and I'd be like, you can have the world. Do you smell the ocean? Percy asked. Piper hadn't noticed at first. She was standing next to Percy and he always smelled like the sea. That is one of my favorite details around him. I want to be around that man forever. I want to be hugging Percy Jackson and have the scent of the ocean around me all the time, always. Also, fun fact, when I was like 12 or 13, my sister for my birthday, and she got me this like lip balm that was like inspired by Percy Jackson, and it smelled exactly like seawater. Like it just smelled like the sea. And I lost it a couple years back, but I know that that store made a candle of that exact scent, and I found like other stores on Etsy that do like Percy inspired candles, but I specifically want to find this one because I know they made a candle of it and it just smelled exactly like the sea, and I just want it because that would smell like Percy and that would be so comforting, but I don't know what it is and it bothers me. I think about it every day. I just want to own that candle, but I don't know specifically what store it was. Maybe I should just buy like all the Percy Jackson inspired candles I can find and just hope for the best. Maybe that's what I should do. I think I should do that. I think that's a good use of my money. I understand that drowning in a bunch of liquid that's draining your power is traumatic no matter who you are, but I imagine the sensation of that would be so fucking terrifying and weird and harrowing for Percy specifically, because he's already got this newfound fear of drowning that he got in Alaska, but even before that he would have thought of the water as like his safe place, and now he's literally, it's not normal water, sure, but he's drowning in water. He's having that experience and that must be so traumatic for him. Piper telling Jason she loves him here. I just don't really care. I've never shipped them. I'm sorry. It's so rushed and it's so bland, and their relationship, I'm just not invested in it. That doesn't hit. That doesn't hit. Like, remember like the first time you read like the Percabeth kiss in Battle of the Labyrinth, the excitement because you've spent so much time with these characters and you've already shipped them so much and you're rooting for them. So by the time you get there, God forbid, by the time you get to the underwater kiss or the Percabeth I love you at the end of this series, it's such an emotional, although I have problems with the Percabeth I love you, we'll get to that in Blood of Olympus. It's such a huge moment because you're so invested in that story, and I just feel nothing. I feel nothing here. When I say the first Percabeth I love you, I do mean the first time Percy says it, because it's like a whole moment, whereas Annabeth says it. She says it here, and then she says it, it's another big moment when she says it again in House of Hades, which is similar to this, but obviously it hits a lot more because, again, we're invested in those characters and we love them and we love the love that they have and we care about that relationship. We don't really have that here. Seriously, these monsters and gods were thousands of years old. Couldn't they take a few decades off and let Percy live his life? Apparently not. A sentiment that I agree with, although I want a solo book with Percy, Annabeth and Grover still. I want something with him as a main character to properly end the Ride verse. That's what I want. But I also want him to have a break. Together, they charged. Things went wrong immediately. I feel like that's a summary of this entire series. You're both dead. I don't care if we have a god on our side or not. Well, that's a shame, said a new voice. To his right, another platform lowered from the ceiling. Leaning casually on a pine cone top staff was a man in a purple camp shirt, khaki shorts, and sandals with white socks. He raised his broad-brimmed hat and purple fire flickered in his eyes. I'd hate to think I made a special trip for nothing. I fucking love him. Entertain me, heroes of Olympus. Give me a reason to do more. Being a god has its privileges. He popped his soda can top and the crowd cheered. I know I should resent him in this moment, but like, I respect it. Percy remembered when Lucas Stellan had told him years ago, when Percy had come back from his very first quest. Didn't you realize how useless it all is? All the heroics being pawns of the Olympians? Percy was almost the same age now as Luke had been then. He could understand how Luke became so spiteful. In the past 5 years, Percy had been a pawn too many times. The Olympians seemed to take turns using him for their schemes. Maybe the gods were better than the Titans or the Giants or Gaia, but that didn't make them good or wise. It didn't make Percy like this stupid arena battle. And like, that's the thing. And I think that the comparisons between Percy and Luke growing as the series progresses and as he gets older is really interesting, because the gods are wrong. The gods should be overthrown. It's just that Luke's methods of going about that was completely incorrect. But I think having Percy get older and understanding more so how Luke got to that conclusion is really interesting and a really realistic thing. And I like that these series are quite critical of the gods. And I think, you know, ending with Trials of Apollo about a god learning humanity again was an interesting way to go about it, but we really should have seen like all the gods doing that, or seen the gods be toppled a little bit. But I think it's interesting to see Percy get to that conclusion, yet at no point does he go down the path Luke went. He doesn't let his resentment or him disagreeing with the gods ever let him hurt his friends or manipulate people. And I think that's a clear difference between Percy and Luke. Well, that was fun. You have my permission to continue your voyage. Your permission? Percy snarled. Yes, Bacchus raised an eyebrow. Although your voyage may be a little harder than you expect, said the Neptune. Poseidon. Percy corrected him automatically. What do you mean about my voyage? 2 seconds before, Percy had been ready to collapse. Now another surge of adrenaline coursed through his body. He wanted to strangle Leo and demand why the Argo Drew hadn't sailed off to rescue Annabeth first, but he thought that might sound a little ungrateful. Interesting how like Percy has this very unhealthy need to protect Annabeth and is like very overprotective of her, and no one really criticizes him for how unhealthy that is, but people will call Annabeth abusive for being jealous when she was 14 all the time. Just a little interesting. It's almost like they're a well-written relationship, so they have their problems that they work through and get through, and they communicate those issues and work on them like how a well-written relationship should, but people only hold Annabeth accountable for her part in the unhealthy parts of their relationship. Interesting to me. A cold pair of hands did the itsy bitsy spider down Percy's back. What an interesting way of describing that he got like a cold chill, considering that he falls down into Tartarus because of Arachne. I've never picked up on that before. That's some fucking brilliant foreshadowing. Holy shit, that's so cool. Nico's eyes looked like shattered glass. Percy wondered sadly if something inside him had broken permanently. Oh my god, I just want Nico D'Angelo to be happy. What the fuck? We also talk a lot about how Percy and Annabeth like went through Tartarus and survived. Friendly reminder that Nico D'Angelo did that alone. Do you all remember when from that description of the doors of death, we all thought that someone had to stay back in Tartarus to like hold the doors closed? Which like kind of, it's not that inaccurate to what actually happens, but we really thought one member of the Seven was going to stay behind and hold down the doors. And I remember all this angsty fan art. There was very a fan art of Leo closing them that made me sob, because, you know, he was always destined to be seventh wheel, so other people thought it would be Leo. I personally wrote some angsty fan fiction about Percy being the one to stay behind. There was angsty fan art drawn of that too. There was a whole moment in the fandom, because like the year leading up to House of Hades, we all really assumed the worst. That was a moment in history. And we're back in my reading chair because it got dark and I need my ring light to film, because I have really crappy yellow lights in my apartment. Thank you. Annabeth knew something about being prideful. It was her fatal flaw as well. She often had to remind herself that she couldn't do everything alone. She wasn't always the best person for every job. Sometimes she got tunnel vision and forgot about what other people needed, even Percy. And she could get easily distracted talking about her favourite projects. Feel a little called out by that one, not gonna lie. As for working against my mother, why shouldn't I? She sent me here to die, didn't she? The last time I saw her in New York, she basically disowned me. Annabeth told her the story. She shared her bitterness and sorrow, and it must have sounded genuine. The spider didn't pounce. Because it probably is genuine. And babe, you should resent her. Athena's treated you like shit. You should be mad about it. You should be angry about it. Every time I see the words "a one-way trip, a very hard fall," my brain goes into song, because I've talked about this on the internet before. I've written a lot of songs about Perciveth over the years, some slightly inspired by them, some directly, and I had one that opened, like the opening lyrics were "a one-way trip, a very hard fall." And I forget that that's said multiple times in this book. I didn't need those flashbacks to my poor songwriting skills. I actually really do love how naturally the Chinese handcuffs idea is like integrated throughout this novel. It is like a very simple thing. You don't question it. It doesn't seem out of character or forced when Frank and Percy find them, or when Frank asks Annabeth for help with them, and then having it come back now is such a nice payoff, but it just feels really natural. It doesn't feel like it's shoved in there. When you're reading it, it doesn't even feel like, oh, this is going to be really important. Like, it just feels like a natural thing that would happen in these books because they have little gags like that, and it's a little bonding moment between Frank and Annabeth. Like, you don't even really think anything of it, and I just think that that's, you know, a sign of Rick being a good author. Just want to appreciate it. Annabeth considered killing the Spider-Woman to shut her up. It would be easy to use her knife now, but she hesitated to kill any monster when it was so helpless. Even Arachne. I just love her. She has, like, again, such a huge heart. This is a literal monster. This is like the biggest monster to ever exist. It's Annabeth's worst fear, and she doesn't want to kill her when she's this helpless. I love Annabeth. Annabeth thinking she's gonna die and just thinking, Percy, I'm sorry. I might cry a lot in this, and you're not allowed to judge me. All the terror seemed to leave her in one massive yelp. As the Argo 2 descended, she saw Percy leaning over the rail. His smile was better than any tapestry she'd ever seen. Fuck, it's okay, he said. We're together. He didn't say you're okay or we're alive. After all they'd been through over the last year, he knew the most important thing was that they were together. She loved him for saying that. I'm trying really hard not to cry. And it's not working very well. I'm doing well. I've been trying to read the last chapter. It's like 5 pages for the past 10 minutes, but I keep crying. Shout out to the fact that I wore waterproof mascara today. I was thinking ahead. Leo blaming himself is a bit too much. This is all a bit too much. I'm really going through it. I don't know why I still get this affected by it. I've read this book many a times. I know it's coming. I know the phrasing of when they fall into Tartarus. Like, I know everything they say to each other by heart. They deserve so much better. And it's really upsetting to me because this is the point where they kind of can't come back. This is the trauma that's like just realistically they could never come back from. They just deserved better. And I'm sad, and them loving each other that much. You know, I talk a lot of shit about not believing in love because, you know, trauma, but fucking hell, maybe love exists. If love ain't real, then why, as long as we're together? You'll ever cry over Perciveth? Alright, well, that was Mark of Athena. I'll see you guys soon for House of Hades, which I'll also cry during, but hopefully a bit less than right now. Thank you for watching. I love you very much, and I'll see you soon, hopefully not in Tartarus. Mwah.